Hi, I'm Bill Groner, host of the Connection Effect podcast, where we explore the science and soul of connection. This is our after show for my episode with Andrew Sether. If you haven't yet, I encourage you to first listen to that episode entitled Connection to Self is Peak Performance to get the most out of what follows. I'm joined today by three of my classmates, Harry, Gaia, and Niels, from the University of Pennsylvania Master of Applied Positive Psychology program. Together, we'll reflect on what resonated most and explore how these ideas might show up in our own lives and in yours. I'll turn it over to Harry now to guide the conversation.
Bill, thanks. Excited to have this conversation and be with this group of friends. If you've listened to the after show before, I always start with a question directed to Bill. Bill, if I'm a listener and I'm coming right off of listening to that episode with Andrew, I've got a few questions just about how you connected with Andrew. And you shared a little bit more than usual in that you had worked with Andrew, and that's how you found out about him and his peak performance program. So you could just share a little bit about maybe that interaction you had with Andrew a couple of years ago, and then what led you to bring him on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Harry. I guess my exploration a few years ago was just how every day I can get the most out of me. I'm sort of fascinated about sometimes you have moods, sometimes you have cognitions, bad cognitions, you're not feeling up for it that day, you're not thinking up for it that day. And I was fascinated and learned about the science of peak performance, and I just wanted to figure out what can I do to bring my best self every day.
Yeah. What was the takeaway you had?
It was a Texas two-step. To me, it was two different things. I'm fascinated about the overlap of mind-body. And through my work with Andrew, it's physiology through breathwork and its cognitions. And I loved how those two interacted and were critical to each other.
Last one before I open it up to all of us. What led you then to bring Andrew on the show to make a connection to connection?
Well, I'm fascinated about, of course, connection to others, but to me, primary to that is connection to ourselves. We need to be our best selves first before we can sort of be our best to each other and to sort of enhance societal harmony. And I'm also fascinated about what really works. We studied the science, but we're focusing on what really changes human behavior. And his work is just so simple and basic, not that we can adopt or adapt it regularly, but I really thought that his takeaways are great for all of us to consider, that we can actually hold on to it, grab it, and use it.
Yeah, you did a great job of making sure the listeners know that this just isn't all about sports. And I like that concept of both of you talking about we're all at any given time having our own personal performances. And to throw it to our group first, I thought we'd start there. And so the question is, what are some of your most important or even most regular performances that you do? And then what keeps you from being at your best, using the lens of what Andrew and Bill talked about?
Well, there's a few things that come to mind. I think of coaching right away because I spent a lot of time doing executive coaching, although I don't want coaching to sound performative because that's certainly not how I show up. Nonetheless, if I've got a particularly intimidating client or maybe it's a chemistry call, there can be that mental chatter. And I like how you talked about the busy brain as well as the inner critic and the distinction between the two. But I think that's one of the environments where I can find myself relying on these techniques and where it's important to be thinking about peak performance. And of course, sales calls. One of the ironies of being human, and I'm borrowing from Dan Pink from years ago when he wrote To Sell is Human, I think was the actual title. We're always selling to some capacity, literally in my case, but when we're trying to connect with other people, there's an element of selling who we are. And I don't mean for that to sound disingenuous or transactional. Nonetheless, every moment, every conversation presents an opportunity for us to be in a performance zone.
Yeah, there is, right, Niels? There's no way you can get around thinking that there is some form of win or lose or maybe just a tie even to, for soccer fans, I'll throw that out there, or hockey fans too.
We do have draws in hockey.
And you have to keep that in mind as we perform, even in a conversation too.
I thought of this from the conversation aspect as well. And specifically, when we all did grad school together, I find the moments that I spoke up in class as being a sort of performance where I've identified in myself, I have something to say here, something that I hope contributes to this conversation. And I want to say it well, even if I start a sentence and I don't really know where it's going, I want to have a point. And that is one thing that came to mind for me in personal performance. And some of the moments where I felt like I was at my best because I was so deeply engaged to the content that I felt like I had something to add. And what keeps me from being at my best felt like a really different type of performance because I thought about all of the things in my life that I would like to be better at, that I would like to be more engaged in, and felt like distractions and limiting beliefs are two really big components of that. I think in today's world, we constantly have notifications going off in our phones. Even if we're in meetings, there might be Slack. And I think that's a real detriment to our peak performance, and also lack of structure, intention, planning, accountability, good goals. All of those things prevent me from being at my best.
I'm feeling attacked here, Gaia. It's like you're pointing out all my flaws.
Oh, no.
Totally
These
kidding.
are my flaws. Maybe we share them.
I'm in good company, as always.
Activating our sympathetic nervous systems as the guy who went through that list.
Harry, for me, performance is just being every moment of the day. It's every interaction I have with myself or with others. And I find what I loved what Andrew talked about is that we sort of build up that anxious response, that fight or flight throughout the day, and our base level as the day goes on just goes a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. Because every interaction you have, there's wins and losses. There's good things that happen. There's bad things that happened. There's anxiety, even positive stress. I mean, for me, during the day when I get excited about things, I find that my levels start to rise during the day, even if I'm doing fun, exciting things. And the problem with that for me is that I'm more likely to be set off in a negative way if I'm at a heightened state of arousal. So to me, that during the day, thinking of like breathing, just one or two breaths to bring me down a notch in arousal will make me less reactive and I think my best self.
It was definitely a powerful point that you guys did a great job of emphasizing throughout the episode too. And it seems then the challenge is, do we have awareness that we're in that moment, that we can use some of these tools that we talked about? And maybe I'll kind of throw this back to the group then. I think that getting to awareness almost always for me needs a guide to help me get there, and a guide that can offer advice or feedback or an observation. And if we think of, maybe if we stick with the cognitive side of things, can you think of what is some great advice that you've had that's helped you keep some of, let's say, Gaia, your laundry list of things that could take you hostage? Some advice that's helped you and that we could pass on in the after show.
I have really loved working with Niels specifically about mindfulness, specifically for leaders.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because he uses the question, how did you resource yourself today?
Ooh.
And that could be something like, I went outside and I went for a walk. I meditated today. I even just brushed my teeth. If you count those things as resources to help you regulate your nervous system, then I think you're more prepared throughout the day to meet that additive stress, especially if you're taking time out of your day to step outside at lunch or something like that. You can kind of ride those waves a little bit more effectively
I love the thought of like the proactive work. Niels, you've got to build on that. I'm loving this question. How do you resource yourself? Where did you come up with that? Or how did you find it?
Well, firstly, I appreciate the shout out, Gaia. Where I found that, I've been doing some work since we graduated from MAP with an organization called Exchange. It's really a community of facilitators and coaches and consultants, folks that are interested in scaling positive change in the world. And so one of the programs that I teach as part of an offshoot from my work with them is this Mindful Leadership Lab that Guy mentioned. And we talk about this idea of when our demands exceed our resources, that's when we find ourselves in that high stress situation, and where we can start to spiral and not show up our best selves, not show up at peak performance. One little thing I'll add to that, Bill, as you're talking about positive stress can have an impact, I'm thinking about eustress, which is positive stress, and distress, which is what we typically think of when we think of stress. It's something that's a little bit more negative in the affect. Stress.org, I don't know if they're still around, but this is something I used to use when I was in the L&D space. The holidays in particular, the cumulative effect of eustress and distress puts our bodies at, to your point, Bill, at an elevated state of arousal. And again, that's where it's hard for us to show up our best selves when we've got all of that stress compounding. Because even though, eustress tends to be a good thing, holidays tend to be a good thing, that's why the holidays can be so stressful. There's just a lot going on. I'll get myself back on track here because I love what you're getting at in terms of awareness, Harry. And I think that part of not just paying attention to how we're showing up in the moment so that we can keep track of that mental chatter, I think this is where meditation is useful. And I love that you were talking to Andrew about breathing, and you touched on meditation a little bit as well, Bill. This is how we can start to get ourselves better resourced, when we are recognizing that how we're showing up isn't really the way that we want to be in the world. And so even just taking a few minutes at the end of the day to go, where did I kick ass today? And where did I totally miss the boat?
I love this awareness question, Harry. One thing that makes me aware when I'm in a heightened state of arousal is when I have annoyed reactions to everyday things. Mm-hmm. I'm driving in a car, I get cut off, and I'm annoyed. Or I'm in line in the grocery store and maybe I thought somebody got in front of me. What I'm realizing is that when I'm annoyed, it's not because of the other person's behavior. It's my response to that behavior. Mm. And I'm off base. And to your point, Niels, meditation, I'm sort of fascinated. Do we meditate prophylactically in advance each day so we have our base arousal down, or do we meditate after we find that we're getting too easily annoyed? I mean, it's a win-win-win, of course. I think
yes, is the answer.
Both.
Yes, yes, and yes. Right, absolutely.
The difference between mindfulness and breath work, that's something people don't often call out. And Andrew made a point to say breath work is one thing, and that is really functional for HRV and making sure that our heart rate variability is flexible. And that is a different story than mindfulness, which can really support us through the mind chatter and helping us be focused and in the moment. Everyone who's done chorus, everybody who's played a wind instrument, anybody who's done athletics where breath is a part of the sport, which I assume all of them, all of these people have done breath work, maybe without knowing that they were doing breath work.
That's such a great point, Gaia.
So yes, mindfulness and also breath work regularly for everybody sounds like it would be really supportive.
I totally agree with that. Breath work for everybody. Coming from 22 years of the Army, there's lots of folks that thought this was bullshit. And until we used it, I was like, oh, this helps you be a hell of a lot more effective as a soldier. I've had the chance to go on some incredible breathwork journeys in the past year or two, which a younger me would have totally poo-pooed. Like, what the hell? A breathwork journey? Come on with this woo-woo crap. But seriously, I went a 45-minute exercise. Oh my gosh. By the end of that,
45 minutes, Niels.
Yes.
Wow.
45. It was a guided event. There's a bunch of us. We're in this large room laying on yoga mats. We've got these very nice soft eye shades on. And Leah's walking around taking us through this exercise. By the end of it, just the buzzy vibration in my body that just felt so restorative and recharging completely blew my mind. The things that are available through breathwork, I've totally become aware in the last couple of years just how incredible that is. So I love that you're calling that out, Guy, because there's an amazing resource there that we tend to take for granted and not even realize is available to us.
And I've been told by a breath specialist that any time of the day you can do it. If you're at a traffic light while it's a red light, take 5 or 10 breaths where your exhale is greater than your inhale, and right away you will see the difference. And interestingly, we did an 8th grade workshop on constructive dialogue. This is for 8th graders, and we did a little breath work. And we did, I think, 2 or 3 breaths. And I saw more students' eyes light up after just that experience of like, wow, that's a difference. I love the fact that we can do it anytime, all the time. We could do it for a minute. We could do it for 45 minutes, which I know has profound, behavioral impacts.
I know it was a key in the episode that you guys spent some time on that. And knowing that I would feel some experts, at least in my eyes, or for where I'm at in my journey on breath work. I'm curious if we've got a listener, and Niels, I'm going to use your term, who still thinks that breath work is woohoo crap. What kind of advice do each of you give to that, either novice or beginner, or maybe even a doubter? What would you say?
So first, there's a ton of research out there. Some folks may care about that if they're coming from more of that analytical space. And so there's plenty of peer-reviewed research on the importance of breath work. In fact, I've got a book somewhere nearby called Breath, or is it Breathe, by James Nestor.
It's a good book.
This totally also blew my mind with the way that so in the Army, we used to make fun of mouth breathers, folks who obviously would breathe through their mouth.
I'm raising my hand if since you can't see us, listeners.
Company excluded, of course. But the research shows that that's actually, it's a problem to breathe through your mouth. It's actually hard on your body to do that. And really, the best ways to breathe just from a baseline are through your nasal passage as much as you possibly can, and to use that diaphragmatic breath. And so I love that Andrew was taking you through that in the episode as well, Bill, because so often we breathe with our chest, and it's a complete misnomer. It's the diaphragm that draws the air into your system. And so I could go on and on about all the amazing stuff with breath. The point is to experience is really, that's the punchline here, Harry.
Yeah. Well, one, if you just listen to the episode, you maybe then are putting your palm on your belly, which we were directed to. And then as you breathe, you feel your belly come out to know you're really activating the diaphragm. And I think of if I'm in line, if I'm face to face with a doubter and we're having the breath argument, which doesn't happen often, but if it did, I think I'd maybe start there. Like, let's just practice breathing differently, and then tell me how you feel. Gaia, how would you tackle a doubter? What advice would you give?
I have 2 things to add on to what Niels already said. The first is that Andrew was very clear in his stance. He believes that the physiology of stress often comes before the mental chatter of stress. And that he could predict with 80% accuracy whether or not how the golfer's swing was going to go. And so that indicates that our body is experiencing stress that can be mitigated by breath work. Otherwise, Andrew would have very, very different suggestions for us. That's one angle of looking at this. The other angle of looking at this is that the woo-woo elements that a lot of us are maybe scared to approach, they might not be scientifically validated. Some of them are, but these are lessons that have been taught for millennia, particularly breath work, from teachers across the globe. They might not have been taken seriously because they come from a different country or they don't have the academic rigor behind them. But who's to say their teachings that have spanned millennia aren't true? So breathwork is one of those teachings that have been passed down through generations, and now we have the science to support its importance. Before then, it was believed and passed down because of the positive effects that it had in people's lives.
So just jumping on the science, because I think it is so important. And I don't recall if Andrew discussed this or if the clip made it to the editing room floor, but engaging the parasympathetic nervous system by exhale engages the vagus nerve, which basically sends signals to the brain, which then sends signals to the body of you're out of fight or flight. You're out of harm's way. Everything's okay. You're safe. So that's sort of what's happening neurophysiologically. And to your point, Harry, what would we recommend to people? 3 or 4 or 5 breaths, where my sweet spot is 4 counts in and 7 counts out. 3 or 4 or 5, and everybody may have a different ratio of those. It's hard to ignore the difference in how you feel.
For sure. As I was listening to that part of it too, I thought back, and I don't know why my brain went here, but I thought back to the first fight I witnessed as a kid. And I went way, way back. And this was at a Little League game, believe it or not. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that when the coach came in to break up this fight, the first thing I literally remember him saying is, you need to both take a deep breath. And when you think, Guy, as you were talking about, this is almost maybe wired into us, right? That in that moment, that's the first thing that coach said to break up the fight. I think it rings true. And it is cool that there is now science and data to back it up.
My mom would tell me and my brother that when we started getting a little heated, that we needed to take some deep breaths. Or same thing when we got hurt. Anything, let's start with some deep breaths and then we'll move on.
Yeah, oh my gosh, we could probably come up with a zillion examples. I saw someone fall off a scooter, which are very fun and also very dangerous. And I was first on the scene, and the first thing I said is, just breathe, just breathe. And I didn't even think about that being the thing I should say first. It just happened. We're getting into maybe some of the physiology of things. And Gaia, earlier in our conversation, you said the acronym HRV, that if you were playing a drinking game during Bill's discussion with Andrew and HRV was your thing, you would have been quite drunk by the end of the episode. And I thought that it would be good to just level set for the listeners who this could be the first time that heart rate variability or HRV, they'd ever heard of it. And then others who might be more experienced in managing their own too. So I thought, how can we help someone who's new to thinking about HRV? Even if we are too, what would we share?
I had to go look at my Apple Watch today to see if it was actually something that it tracked. Surprise!
What did you find, Niels? I'm not far behind you, by the way.
Well, that's why the little green light turns on. I was like, my kid was asking me the other day, why does your watch go green? I was like, I don't know. I think it's checking my heart rate. Sort of is. It's the heart rate variability.
How would you explain Niels' HRV to someone based on what you know so far? And I'm going to take us around the horn because I think this could be helpful.
Well, I got to steal your word, Guy. You said flexibility earlier, because the variability, we're talking about how much the variance is between your heart beats. And so I think about, well, I'm a little bit of an endurance athlete. And so I think that's where it's useful for me when I'm running marathons and when I'm training. My HRV, the more that I pay attention to it, gives me a sense of how my body is recovering when I'm putting it under physical stress.
That's great. Gaia, what would you add?
I think flexibility is a good word for it because it demonstrates dynamicism. So our hearts all have to be able to handle different situations. When you are in an athletic situation, let's say you're running a marathon, versus when you are winding down to rest at the end of the day, your heart needs to be able to adapt to both situations properly. It needs to beat quickly when it needs to be pumping blood through your body. And it needs to be slowly when you're resting so that your body does actually recuperate in the way that it needs to. So your HRV is the measure of its flexibility to go to both poles and oscillate pretty quickly. That's my understanding.
Right. So a good way to say, like, if it's a higher variability, it is doing both of those extremes when it needs to appropriately. If it's a lower variability, then that could be cause for concern.
Yeah, it's a shorter range of capability.
Bill, what was your takeaway as you were talking to Andrew and doing the HRV thing?
Well, I can tell you the Aura Ring also tracks HRV, and the single most way to decrease your HRV is to drink alcohol. And it's remarkable and it's scary. And I'm not a heavy drinker by any stretch. I hardly drink anymore. But when I do, my heart rate variability goes down almost in half. Certainly reduces by a third to a half. It's remarkable. And that is another marker against alcohol. And there's plenty of studies now talking about that. I mean, to me, HRV is just the resilience of the body, and everything from high intensity interval training to breathing and meditation. All of those things enhance your HRV. And there's a direct relationship between HRV and ability to withstand stress and longevity. But as Andrew mentioned, HRV training is a long-term thing. That's not something that you just do based on our podcast or, reading a few things. So I would caution our listeners, if they're interested in that, they should really do some deeper dive research into the things that they can do, which again include working out as well as meditation and breathing.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I saved myself for last because I've recently had my HRV measured for the very first time. And it was part of a lot of coaching like Niels does. I've had a lot of leaders who go through like a battery of tests. It might be a benefit from the organization they work with, et cetera. And HRV is part of those. And so I thought, well, why don't I do that too? All of my numbers were great except one, which was my HRV was just in the shitter. And so it was of course, I didn't want to celebrate all my good data. I wanted to ask what the heck was up with the HRV. And I'll add into the stew here. The way the doctor started explaining it to me was, if you have a low HRV, it means the brain's not able to communicate with the rest of the body very well as to how the body should react to what's happening. And the heart is probably the most direct connection to the brain in this example that she was giving. A high HRV means the brain's very efficient at communicating what the rest of the body should do based on, Gaia, you said it well, when you need both extremes, it can take you there quickly. And so, of course, I then said, okay, well, what the heck do I do about that? It's low. And went back to talking about just what we have been talking about: breath work, meditation, being aware of situations that activate high levels of arousal, and spending some time with what type of self-talk is in your head. How distracted are you? Like, it was as if this episode was meant to complement what my doctor talked to me about. The only thing I would add in, and Bill, I'm so glad you said it, you do need to have yours measured by a professional and have a conversation, because the physician I worked with also said that some people have a natural low or high default. So your low score could really just be a benchmark. The thing would be then to regularly start measuring it, and then see what, Bill, as you said, if you're on a journey to get it higher, to see what maybe your best default setting should be.
How did they measure it for you, Harry? I'm curious. Did they strap you on the treadmill with the face mask thing?
That's the VO2 max, which would be another fun one to talk about too. Yeah. So it is a lot. I would say there's a lot of tests going on all at once, but I'd say it was like if you've had like a EKG done or something like that, it can be super quick, which is why, you've got wearables that can do it too. But it is the distance between beats of your heart So what they're talking is just, mega milliseconds of time to get this measurement, which is fascinating because it can give us such an indication of your risk for a lack of longevity or your ability to have greater longevity and so many other health factors too. I think, Bill, it was great that Andrew has really, made that metric a big part of the foundation of his work for peak performance. I want to maybe get us close to some final questions. And I liked this question, Bill, that you asked. Is your physiology in the best place to make the best decision? Almost as a way of reflection, is your physiology in the best place to make the best decision? I'm really obsessed with this concept, especially in my coaching of, is the person that I'm working with, are they at optimal or not? Are they at their best to do their best? And this, I think, is a great way to look at it too. I'm curious if anyone has a story of where you asked yourself that question, or maybe wish you had asked yourself that question.
So this goes back to, I think, something that Gaia mentioned earlier. I think it's critical for us to talk about, which is the negative mind chatter and the negative self-talk. And that the physiology, if it's not in its optimal state, gives rise to that negative thinking because your body thinks you're in fight or flight. They're anxious. From an evolutionary perspective, you're in protection mode, and it creates potentially a lot of negative self-chatter. So that 1-2 punch, I think, is critical for us to all recognize, where the physiology, you want to get that down to base level to sort of prevent the negative self-talk.
Bill, you gave that great example of getting ready to speak to a bunch of alums of the program that brought us together, and you became aware that your physiology wasn't in the best place.
Yeah. And then what I didn't realize is why. Why does that sort of anxiety result in negative talk about, is this going to go well? But what we learned is from the science, the message is the brain is telling the body, you're in arousal, you're in fight or flight, danger. And then you're recognizing that, and that sort of takes over. And I think the same thing with, the golfers doing the bad shot, or all of us who are having something where the physiology is off, and then we're going to have cognitions that are not going to help us out of the problem. They're going to make us go deeper into the problem.
I love it. Is your physiology in the best place for you to make the best decision?
I think something really interesting on this topic is when Andrew brought up this concept of an imprint. It was so quick, but I heard that and I rewound it and I listened to it like 3 times. And he described that when stressors are not properly released, they create an imprint on the body. You can release this with activation of your parasympathetic nervous system, but if you don't, it's like it leaves a mark, so to speak. And I was in a car accident when I was in high school. Not bad, but it was really scary. And it was the first snowfall of the year, driving downhill, didn't have snow tires yet. A friend was driving. And now when I'm in a car and the snow is falling, I'm going downhill, that is like lives within me as a fearful situation. And I can act in not my best self because I'm coming from this place of fear, and my body remembers the fear of that accident so deeply that automatically I'm more irritable and more scared right off the bat.
Hey, Gaia, thanks for sharing that. You can see the power of the imprint even as you're sharing this with us too. And what a great point, right? Are you at your best to then react to the conditions? And yeah, it's easy to say no. The answer is no in that case.
The body keeps the score. I just want to go on a slight tangent for just a second, because I think really we're talking about the mind-body connection. You said that earlier, Bill. And just one other thing that I feel like is important for our physiology to be at its best is sleep. And that's a whole nother topic that we could spend a whole lot of time talking about. But it's important to recognize how much sleep helps the body to repair, especially emotionally. And that's why I'm thinking about being able to be at our best for decision making. Because when we haven't had enough sleep and we're operating on a deficit, I know personally, cognitively, I'm not where I want to be when I'm on a sleep deficit. But there's actually a bunch of emotional repair that happens during sleep, and that's part of why it's so critical to our bodies. I'm wrapping up this fascinating certification in burnout coaching, and that's one of the things that we spend some time on. But again, this mind-body connection, I think there's so many facets that help us be at our peak performance and be able to make our best decisions. But
I think that's critical, what you just said. And I believe there's a direct relationship between good sleep and HRV also, Niels. But I don't want to stay on this negative self-talk because we all experience it from time to time. And I think it's important to, number one, be aware of it. Number two, come up with ways in which to stop it. Andrew was talking about where the golfers, he was teaching them, as soon as you have that thought saying, stop, the reason you're having that is because your physiology, and give yourself a clean slate and say to yourself, I can do this. And it made me think of, there's a great study on stress mindset where I think it was a bunch of students, they trained them that stress could be good for you instead of bad. So people, you're about to give a speech, you're about to go through a test, you're about to have an important conversation, and you're anxious. And if you realize that the stress and the fight or flight mechanism, the arousal actually helps you, that adrenaline can be helpful, it helps you direct your resources, it focuses your attention, it can actually enable you to have a better performance. Adrenaline is very positive. And if you go through life realizing when your adrenaline is flowing that, stress could be good. Well, this study showed that those people who believed that performed better and had better emotional responses to it. And I think about that all the time when I am going through something and I'm feeling that stress. And that simple little trick of saying, oh no, this is okay, this is normal, it's natural, and it's actually maybe helpful, can make a difference in the performance.
I think they refer to that as the threat response versus the challenge response. And when you perceive the stress to be a challenge that you can overcome, then you're more ready to tackle it. And your physiology shifts so that it's more focused at overcoming the challenge instead of fight, flight, or freeze. And the way to shift that mentality is, do you feel like you have enough resources to handle the situation? Mm-hmm. So in that moment, you can think about all the resources or all the skills that you have to meet that challenge, or all the people in your life that can help you through it.
If you want to really nerd out on it, look up Yerkes-Dodson curve, and it will show you a curve with performance and anxiety being the axis, and how at some point, as Bill said, a little bit of arousal or stress can increase performance, but to a certain point, and then it goes the other way.
Harry, I was literally just trying to think of what the paper was. I don't know if that was from our program or not.
I was Niels looking it up on my phone, so I'm just going to tell on myself. Luckily, I found it. It moves us, though, into, I think, a good place to close out, because we've covered some great personal stories. We've gone back in millennia to look for advice. We've gone to the science. I have regulated my HRV in the moment, as we've talked. But I always like going to where Bill closed the episode. Bill, you said when we are more regulated internally, we connect better externally. Notice what's inside, take a breath longer on the exhale, and choose one thought that moves you forward. So maybe we can close with that. What is one thought that moves you forward after our discussion today? Niels, let's start with you.
I think my one thought is I can do hard things. I know, Bill, you were going through a couple of mantras, and I don't remember all the ones that you talked with Andrew about, but we can never turn off the mental chatter, nor should we. It comes from a place of safety and self-preservation. And so that's why that inner critic's always there. Of course, when the volume gets too loud, that's where it negatively impacts our performance. And so I could riff a whole lot longer than on that whole topic, because especially I'm thinking about parenting. And when I'm dysregulated, I can't get my kids to regulate. And so there's a whole other lens to this, but I think it just comes back to keeping in mind that I can do hard stuff. We talked about self-efficacy in our program quite a bit. And so even when I'm feeling unresourced and like I'm not up to the challenge, take a step back and remember all the hard stuff I've done in my life. And yeah, I can get through this too. And there's always an incredible gift on the other side of the worst challenges that we face. So I guess that's the other thought that I think about. It's not just I could do hard stuff. There's going to be a gift. There's going to be a lesson. Might take me a while to find it, but there's going to be a reward on the other side of this.
Love it. Thanks, Niels. Gaia, how about you?
One that came to me recently is I'm brave enough to fail. And fear of failure is real for me. I sometimes don't try things if I don't think I'm going to be good at it, but I have bravery and I am brave enough to fail. So I might as well give it a go. What's the worst thing that can happen? Within reason, of course.
Hell yeah.
I love it. I love it. I would say, and then Bill, I'll turn it over to you to close this out. I would say my thought is I am never not amazed by what happens when you ask someone, how are they feeling about something? And it can seem a little cliche or like it can seem Dr. Philly. It can seem lots of different things. But this
Freaky Friday.
Freaky Friday, all of those things. But there is something about asking, how do you feel about that? How did that make you feel? That creates some awareness, which I know we've talked about. And then to follow up with, how do you want to feel? And then what will get you there are thoughts that I know I always challenge myself with when I'm not necessarily happy with how I'm feeling. And it surprises me every time, even though I know people know I'm going to ask them, I know I'm going to ask myself, that it still creates some sort of then physiological reaction to go with the cognitive one too. Bill, to you to close this out.
Thanks, Harry. I think one takeaway from listening to us talk is your word awareness, Harry. I think a lot of us, and I know sometimes I'm so deeply in my own head, I'm losing that awareness and sense of just what's happening around me and in front of me, whether it's emotions, whether it's thoughts and cognitions, whether it's the people that I am with. So I think that sort of awareness is a huge issue and something that I always work on. Harry, seriously, dude, you're amazing in this role. And Niels and Gaia, you guys are awesome. Everything I'm learning, your tone, your substance, your humor, everything about you. What a stellar job. To our audience, thank you for listening to this edition of the After Show, and we really appreciate you being part of this community. The conversation doesn't stop here. You can visit our Substack at connection.net/Substack and add your voice. We'd love to hear from you. And Niels, Gaia, and Harry, what an absolute pleasure to talk to you about really anything in human flourishing and well-being. And I so appreciate you guys generally and for coming in and for what you shared today. So thank you, Niels, Gaia, and Harry.
Thank you, Bill. What an absolute treat. Couldn't have said it better than you did, but it's a gift to have you all in my life. So thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's a gift to have you all in my life too. I hope you all go forth and breathe.
I echo what has been said. So fun to be with great friends talking about cool things that I hope help people improve their well-being. And I echo, Gaia, what you said. Remember, if all else fails, just take a deep breath.
Thanks again.
Ta-da! Yay!
Yay!